Welcome, everyone, to another episode of Cybersecurity Weekly. I'm your host, Fred Cobb, Executive Vice President with InfoSystems. And along with me, Chad Waddell, Senior Security Consultant, also at InfoSystems. Last episode, we talked about Center for Internet Security, critical security controls, and we focused on control number one, which is hardware asset inventory. We're going to continue in that vein and go to control number two, which is closely tied to hardware asset inventory, and that would be software asset inventory. And we're going to talk about some of the ways to secure from a software perspective. Why do you need to control software assets? Why do you need to have an understanding what software is running on your system? So we're going to spend the next few minutes talking about all those different topics. So sounds pretty exciting to me, Chad. I don't know about you.
I love it.
I can't wait. So let's just jump right in there. So again, just referring back to the last episode, we talked about understanding assets on the hardware side. Now we're wanting to mesh that to what software is running on those hardware assets.
Correct.
And how do you have a feel? How do you control that inventory? What are the reasons why you want to control that inventory?
Sure.
So just take it away.
Yeah. So the key there is you can't really know what software you have in your environment until you know what assets you have, because it turns out the software runs on those assets. So that's critical. So once you know what assets are in your environment, you have a lot more introspection in your environment. You have a lot more insight into your environment. And then the same type of tools that we mentioned earlier can go out and scan your environment and pull in the software on those assets as well. But so the question is, why do you want to have that inventory? Well, once you scan your environment and get an idea of what all software is out there, just like with the assets, you can discern what is authorized software and unauthorized software.
That's very important.
Yeah, and so in most of the vulnerabilities that you're dealing with in your environment is going to be strictly software related. So if you can reduce your overall risk and your footprint in your environment, so you look through the software and say, okay, we know that these 10 pieces of software are highly vulnerable, but not needed. Why leave it on systems?
Sure.
To get rid of it. So looking from that perspective of what's needed, what's not, what's authorized, what's unauthorized.
Yeah, a common thing that we see when we're doing assessment work is a lot of times the end user will have administrative access to their workstation or to their laptop. With that level of access comes the ability to install any software that they care to download.
Right. On purpose or not.
On purpose. Yes, it can be something gets installed in the background just by clicking on a website. They're unaware that that's running. So having a really good foundational methodology around controlling that is going to help you to really secure, have less chances for malware outbreaks, virus outbreaks. Also, just to stay in licensing compliance with the various vendors you buy software from.
If you don't know what you have, how can you be compliant? So kind of taking from what you were saying there, looking at the overall software like list that you come up with when you do the inventory, then you can really start getting a grasp of what's in your environment, get that insight about what you should tackle, what you should be dealing with. Vulnerability wise, you're looking at if you remove the software that has these 20 critical vulnerabilities in it, then it's no longer a risk. You don't have to worry about it. Same thing going back to the hardware assets. If you remove an asset that's a high risk item, let's say it's a desktop that's running Windows 7, so end of life. You remove that system, you remove the risk. So that's the idea. A lot of people or organizations are very surprised that when they scan their environment with a tool like Spiceworks or Landsweeper, for example, that they'll have thousands of pieces of software in their environment. Just thousands.
Oh, yeah. It's amazing.
And then you go through that list, and it may seem tedious, but it's like, what is actually needed in here? What is needed to get to that principle of like least functionality for your systems? Only the software that needs to be running on it, only the services that need to be running, get it down to that point. Because what we find a lot in these instant responses, or if you hear in the news where organizations get hacked all the time, a lot of times you'll see somewhere in the article, especially if it's a more technical one, that says they were exploited through a vulnerability in X software. And then also a lot of times they'll say a patch was released a year ago.
Right.
And it's even more embarrassing if it's a piece of software they never actually needed. It wasn't being used at all.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, we think about patching, and we've had episodes about patch management and why it's such an important part of your cybersecurity program. But a lot of people will immediately jump to, it's the monthly Microsoft patches. But there's so many vulnerabilities that exist out there on commonly used software that you'll see on a Windows system, you'll see on a Mac system, et cetera. So staying up with those patches, or like you said, if it's a piece of software you don't need, if the corporate makeup of approved, not even approved software, but the software that you use doesn't require that particular piece of software to be running, why have it on the system?
Yep. You're just introducing unneeded risk.
Right. And it's very common, again, with this issue of a lot of the end users having local administrative rights on their systems, very common where you may have 10 developers in a room.
Right.
And this developer likes this tool, so they'll go out to the internet and download it. Well, the developer sitting beside them, no, this tool's better. So even regarding a specific function or how to achieve something, you'll have different people with different ideas, and all of a sudden you've got this software spread again, and trying to manage that from a vulnerability perspective is impossible.
Different versions too.
We'll be back with the Cybersecurity Weekly podcast after we pause for this special message. Security analysts believe cyber attacks will continue to escalate throughout 2020 and are recommending that every company, regardless of industry or size, place immediate focus on cybersecurity training and the tools that will protect you from these attacks. Did you know that you can book a cybersecurity assessment right now with Fred Cobb's team of cybersecurity engineers at InfoSystems? They will help you discover exactly where you are most vulnerable to a cyber attack and make recommendations on how to strengthen your defense in those areas. This is urgent. It's an issue that affects everyone in our community. Visit the InfoSystems website at www.infosystems.biz to request your cybersecurity assessment. Now back to the podcast.
So you've got, this piece of software, this piece of software, this piece of software, and there's 20 different versions across your environment. Well, if it's something that's actually mission critical, you want to keep it, but you also need to make sure that it's maintained. You need to make sure that it's patched, that's up to the newest version that you can use for business purposes. And the way I always like to look at your servers or your workstations or anything that's running software in your environment is any application, any service that's running on there is something that needs to be maintained, something that can break, and something that can be exploited. And if you think about it that way, there's more of a sense of urgency about each piece of software that's run on the system. I'll give you one quick example. iTunes used to be installed on a lot of computers and still sits on a lot of computers and environments because end users or employees would have like iPhones, and you have to have iTunes to set it up in the past. You don't have to do that anymore. Now, let's say IT actually went through and removed iTunes. Well, the problem is iTunes would install other types of software on your system, like Bonjour. Exactly. Bonjour is a known entry point for a number of pieces of ransomware. So if you've got iTunes or the peripheral software that came with it, let's say like QuickTime as well in the past, highly vulnerable. So if you remove those pieces of software, you've removed that risk. It's no longer a major risk for your organization.
So we've talked about the why. Why is it important to maintain software asset control? Why is it important to understand? What are some of the tools that business owners and IT departments can use to get a good feel for what software is actually out there that they may not know about?
Yeah, so SpiceWorks once again is going to be a great one. It's a free tool for small to medium-sized organizations. Landsweeper is going to be a great tool as well. Those we like to put out there because they're either free or low-cost solutions that just you get the best bang for your buck from a security perspective. And then pivoting that into a previous podcast that you had with whitelisting. So that's kind of the goal. So if you can get to the point where you have all the software inventory and you know what's authorized and what's unauthorized, and now that you have an actual list of authorized software, you're in a position to be able to whitelist. And once you can whitelist software in your environment, the maturity level of your cybersecurity program then is way higher than most organizations.
Yeah, you can't understate the importance of at least considering application whitelisting in your environment. So much control is granted through that.
Yes.
So again, I don't want to make this a topic about application whitelisting, but since you mentioned it, if you have that list of software and that is the only software that's approved to run, that has the capability of running due to the technical controls in place, if malware is downloaded through a phish campaign or someone brings in a USB stick and it's unbeknownst to them, it's got some malware on it.
Right.
That software simply can't run because it's not in the white list of software approved to run.
Yeah.
So personally, I wish more and more companies would strongly consider deploying some sort of whitelisting technology. It just cuts down the amount of risk that you have considerably.
It's just hard to get there, but that's the key, like just looking at these first two controls. If you can scan your environment, see what assets you have, see what software you have, reduce it down to what's absolutely needed and what's authorized, then you're in that position where you can do it. If you just try to whitelist without doing that inventory, you're never going to be successful at it. It's just not possible, unless you're just focusing on like one or two systems. But the key is, can you imagine from an IT perspective, we see as this happens for organizations, as we implement these controls, the power of being able to just pull out an up-to-date inventory of assets, an inventory of software. They immediately have that kind of insight into your environment. Very few organizations can really say that they have that.
Yeah, can you speak just for a moment on the audit ramifications of software asset control?
Yeah, so on the Microsoft side especially, you could be called up at any point or get an email from Microsoft saying, hey, you're being audited. And you have to provide them with the licenses that you use. In a lot of cases, there could be previous IT that work there. There could be MSP type companies. There could be all these different organizations, individuals involved with these licenses. But if you don't have a proper inventory in front of you, you don't know what you have. And you can't properly tell Microsoft what you have. So part of the inventory too, ideally would involve information like the licensing information. So it'd be like the maturity to the next level of that is ensuring that way that Microsoft comes to you and they're like, we need to see exactly what Microsoft licenses you're using out of this list of what they provide. You can have your list ready and you can provide that information right away.
Yes, and business owners may not have run into a Microsoft licensing audit yet, but they're very aggressive.
Yes.
And I've been at 3 different organizations where Microsoft or some third party on behalf of Microsoft is actually conducting the audit, and they are looking for ways to, let me just say it, ways to charge you for extra money or the money that technically you should be paying if you are using licenses that you haven't purchased through proper channels and maintaining that level of control. So it is important from a cost perspective to always be in control of auditable software to make sure that your licensing is such that it should be, and you understand how much it's going to cost you.
Yeah, the audit could turn out to be a tax on you for not having an inventory.
Yes, absolutely. Well, Chad, as usual, great information.
Thank you.
Again, we've been talking about the CSC baseline control number 2, CSCs through the Center for Internet Security. We highly recommend that those business owners out there looking for a security framework that don't fall into some sort of HIPAA compliance requirement, or even if you do, CSC is still a good tool.
Absolutely.
Or PCI. I mean, it feeds those type of compliance requirements
as
well. But for those of you that don't, it's still a good idea to adopt some sort of framework, and the CSC is a great framework.
You don't need to reinvent the wheel.
Right.
Yeah.
In an upcoming episode, we're going to move to baseline control number 3 and talk about vulnerability management, or the concept of continuous vulnerability management. And we're just going to keep along the theme of the CSC controls that we feel like are important for our audience to hear, understand, and adopt into their environment.
Great.
Yeah.
Awesome.
So, as usual, thanks again for tuning in today. We love having these episodes. We love conveying information about topics that are of interest to us. And we once again thank you for tuning in, and we'll see you next time.
Thank you.